So, Lisa, series 4,
Yes.
we're doing something different.
Yes.
We're actually gonna invite people who are crazy.
Yes.
I mean, that ought to be interesting. Let's see how it goes. We're gonna be talking about storytelling this time around. Let's do storytelling. I mean, at the end of the day, you and I share a whole bunch of stories back and forth. So let's just do
We do.
story. Do you have any more stories you want to share with me?
Yeah. I've got a lot of them, but we have somebody more interesting on the on with us today.
All right, here we go. Okay, let's get this going. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for the wins and the grind. We're doing something different this time. We're series 4. We're going to be meeting with people. I'm your co-host, Adrian Escobedo. I've got Lisa Tilt, global entrepreneur, on with me today. I try to find different ways to flatter her
I
every time. So, Lisa, I want to introduce today's guest. Yes, we're doing guests in series 4 here. Bev Crair, I met. We're not going to say how long ago it was because it was a while ago. Bev, I met actually at one of the companies I was working at. She was doing a keynote. She was one of the executives. And this was before I knew executives were people that you could talk to.
That's a
Uh,
good
so I'm,
point. Yeah.
so I'm,
You know
so,
what? Yeah.
so I'm sitting there in this huge auditorium, probably 150 people there in the auditorium, and Bev's doing a keynote. And what blew me away about Bev, not only is she wicked smart, uh, she's a female in tech, VP of engineering. You can't say guy more times in a sentence than that right there. And she's up there owning the stage, owning the audience, and talking, just telling these stories about how she's gotten people to be more creative, to be more interesting, and be authentically themselves. I was blown away, had to meet this lady, and luckily had the privilege of doing several different projects with her. Bev Crair, I think you did something pretty interesting, Bev. You launched a niche product at a company in a short amount of time that just took off. The industry had never, ever seen it before. Congratulations on pulling that off. But secondly, welcome to the Wins and the Grind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Happy to support.
So, Bev, we nicknamed you the traveling storyteller between you being all over in many different countries throughout your life, but then now and I think you said the next stage of your life, this is the third act of your life. You are just all over the place, not only going to different countries, mind you, but on a motorcycle from country to country to
I
country to
love that.
that is sick crazy. I'm excited. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Mhm.
But I think we want to talk about just, authenticity and being yourself and so on and so forth. So I guess I asked you a question a long time ago. What are 3 things that you would want somebody to take from time spent with you?
So I think I think the three things would be honoring yourself and what you have to offer, right? Because there's always something that I can learn from somebody else, right? So honoring yourself, being your authentic self, that is worthwhile, that it has value, right? That integrity matters in lots and lots and lots of different ways, and that you can be effective and smart and um, value add to the organizations that you work with and still have fun.
Like the full circle of that. You're kind of coming in with some strategy and some feel goodness and all the things that I think are so important to the conversation. I love that.
I don't know, life's too short, right?
Yeah.
If you're not having fun and you're not being who you are, and not valued for who you are, you need to figure out how to put yourself in a situation where those things are true, right? So it's not, just give up on it. It's just you gotta go find out where that space is.
Bev, earlier we were talking about how we now have choices that we can make to work at companies where not only do they help us be our authentic self, but also reflect our authentic selves as well. And, when we were all starting in our careers, I don't know necessarily that, well, give me your opinion. Were we not aware that we could do that? Or was it just not the way things were done? Because now, people are making those smart decisions and feeling good about those decisions.
I think that those options have always been there. I think there's two things, right? One, do the economic conditions support
Mm.
you taking those options, right? And two, do you have the courage, right, to take those options? Because sometimes you need to make a different decision. And I think today, what we're seeing, so I think we were talking about this with respect to the ideas of generational perspectives, right? Gen X,
Right.
Gen Y, millennials, boomers, whatever. And the comment that I made was that I don't think that Gen X or Gen Y or millennials approach things fundamentally differently. I think that what we're seeing now is that there's a much broader range of potential, of behavior, of options that people think are legitimate options. And the example that I used, I think, was, we're recognizing, for instance, that there's a lot of range of neurodiversity. There's a lot of range of gender diversity. There's a lot of range of um, kinds of people that participate in stuff, right? Whether it's race or ethnicity or experience, right? And that there's a lot more room for that range. And attaching a generational statement about it, or even a gender statement about it, oh, you're a man, you are going to act this way, right? Is less effective, right? Than it used to be. So I think there's a lot more room for
Yeah.
people to make choices that are effective for them and their families, or whatever, their space. And that's why you're seeing, I think COVID actually contributed to that, right?
Yeah, bringing
Because
people into your living rooms or your home offices, right? Literally.
right, right. And then figuring out how to manage that. And everybody was going through the same thing at the same time. Right. So everybody was trying to do this figuring out thing. Whereas those of us who'd actually been working with non-co-located teams for decades, right? I mean, I had my first non-co-located team in the 90s, in the early 90s, right? Even
Wow.
in the 80s, actually, on my first job, I was working with a team in Southern California and a team in New Zealand, and we were trying to communicate. This is pre-email,
Yeah.
pre-email. Just saying. And so, what are the skills that you need in order to make that effective? And all of those skills directly translate to things like, the events that we went through from a working.
We as Gen Xers and just under and just over have seen a lot of this transit. I'm having different conversations in the office now, 100% than I did even 10 years ago, much less 20. And I think, with the series being really about storytelling in business, right? And you've shared with us some amazing stories that enriched not only your experience, but the people that you were talking to or have mentored over the years. And I really see storytelling as the bridge. And I think, or as a bridge. And I think these days that is more expected in an employer. I think that people are more willing to tell sort of a story that's not just business related, but ties to them personally. Or, on the flip side is if you're just kind of talking business speak all the time, you're not connecting, right? I think we're seeing the divergence of the two experiences more plainly. And I'd love for you to tell, you'd mentioned something about translation related to how you kind of consider storytelling. I'd love to kind of have you explore that a little bit.
I think that when we were talking about translation, I think that certainly the role of a manager is about translation. And very often the role of a sales person or a service person is about translation, right? Because it's about understanding where or who your audience is and where they're coming from, what their problem space is, what they're trying to solve for, and connecting that to what you know to be true. And to do that, for me, what's worked the best, right, is something that we kind of coined story listening, which
Yes.
is
I
how
love
do
that.
you set aside what you know to be true and really listen to where the other person is or where they're coming from. And that could be an audience, a large group audience, 5,000 people, as much as it could be just an individual or a set of people that you're working with, right? So there's a perspective, there's a space that they come from. and there's a space that you come from. So you can imagine a bridge, opposite sides of the bridge. And you actually have to figure out how to set aside your part of the bridge and walk across that bridge and stand on the other side of that bridge and be that person, right? You've heard the phrase, walk a mile in someone's shoes. There's all kinds of phrases associated with this. But ultimately, the only way that people remember something and remember an interaction, remember your product, remember what you're asking them to do is if they connect it with something they already know. Right? That's the way our brains work.
Yeah. They'll remember
That's the way our
something
brains grow.
worth repeating. It
Right?
is worth repeating, Bev. I love that.
But in order to do that for somebody to remember something, and in order to get somebody else to remember something, you actually have to figure out what it is that you're supposed to connect it to. Right? That's why I call it story listening. Right?
Yeah.
And so part of that is actually getting your head around where that other person is coming from. So this story, if you've had the chance to read Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits book, it's been around for a long, long time. I first met Stephen Covey in the 80s, right? So, or in the early 90s. No, I think it was the end of the 80s. Anyway, doesn't matter. But he had a story about seeking first to understand that I'll share with you because it's one that I think everybody can remember, right? So he talks about getting on the subway and it's late at night and he's tired, right? And he's just like, I'm done, right? I just want to live in my own space. And a guy gets on the subway with 4 kids, right? Teens and younger, and sits down. And the kids are like running up and down the subway, making all kinds of noise and racket. And Covey's just like, geez, right? Can you not control this situation, right? I'm tired. I want to just stop, right? Just get them out of my space. And the guy's sitting there and he looks up at him and he says, God, I know that they shouldn't be doing this, but we just spent the last day with their mother in a hospital and we still don't know what's going to go on. And Covey talks about this story and he says, in that instance, my attitude about the kids running up and down the subway changed. And my whole perspective about what was going on changed. And you can feel it in yourself. It's like,
Yeah.
And so it wasn't he changed this other person's mind. It wasn't that he was able to tell this person, hey, you need to control your kids. It was that he set aside what he knew to be true. Kids shouldn't be running up and down the subway screaming. He set aside what he knew to be true and walked across that bridge to understand where that other person was coming from.
Yeah.
And thus his perspective on what was going on changed.
Yeah.
And so storytelling is as much about telling a story as it is about helping figure out how to hook that story to what your audience knows and understands.
Bev, when I first got to hear you speak, you had fantastic statistics that talked about people being able to be themselves and the results from a business perspective. I mean, that was the whole net of the keynote was that, allowing people to find joy at work through being comfortable. And then you as the leader got to see so much more benefit, so much more creativity. And what blew me away was so much more collaboration,
Mhm.
in a very, which could be tense and diverse, for many different reasons, culture, you led an engineering company, which was all over the globe, So talk to me about how you made that a place where people felt comfortable so that way their stories could play out.
I think that what I learned about people at least people in the technology space, right, is that you can tell a story, but you have to back it up with data,
Mm.
right? And so this conversation that we have around different perspectives and figuring out ways to include those different perspectives in solving a problem isn't just, hey, here are all the stories that I've had where I've done that and it's been successful from a project
Right.
perspective or from a product perspective, but it's also the business data that backs it up, right? So we know, for instance, that teams are more than 50% more effective when they have diverse perspectives on the team, when they figure out a way to actually include those perspectives on the team, right? Engineering is about solving problems that people haven't solved before,
Right.
right? And in order to do that, you need to think differently about that problem and about the potential solutions. In order to do that, you actually have to find people who think differently, right? You have to include all those different perspectives. And it could be lots of different ways that people come at things from different perspectives, right? It could be race, creed, and color, right? It could also be background, degree or not degree, level of experience, even different perspectives of the product space itself. That is, including product management, including economics, including the customer, including lots of different. And it depends on the size and shape of the problem that you're trying to solve, of course.
Right.
Um, but my experience has been when you actually are able to open the space for that communication, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve? What do we have at our disposal in order to solve that? How do we do that? How do we listen and engage to be able to move things forward? Is when you are really able to come up with creative solutions, right? And this is where I have done battle with myself over the years on non-collocated teams, because my experience shows me that over the years, getting people together physically in the same space matters.
Yeah. It's just
And
different.
so it does. It's different.
Yeah.
It is just fundamentally different. Oh, you're taller than I expected. You're shorter than I expected. But I think that human beings exchange data when they're together, physically together, at a much, much, much higher rate than we currently believe they do.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so that is and I've done battle with myself on this one over the years. A lot.
I
I
bet.
I have to point out before Lisa asks her next question, but I have to
Yeah.
point out that for the first time ever in history, we have sales, marketing, and engineering on the same call, all going in the same direction. I'm throwing it
David,
out there.
boy, that's such a good call out. I appreciate that. That's really important, actually. Look at us, all bridges all around.
There you go. It just dawned on me when Bev was going through that. I was like, wait a second, this is like the first time ever that sales, engineering, and marketing are all agreeing on something. This is awesome.
And that kind of it sort of leads into I think I wanted to pick up on something you were laying down, Bev, and kind of double click into something. So, um, sort of planning versus not planning. And I think from the perspective of um we're not planning for a pandemic when everybody goes out and doesn't have human and I don't want to keep talking about the pandemic, but it was sort of that moment in time. So you've been working with co-location teams and I had sort of one day remote, like it was this crazy idea, right? Since I started my company 20 years ago. It's like you kind of move these and then sort of the shifts in how people go to work was just sort of amplified during that time. And we're still coming out. There's still headlines of like going back to work 5 days or not. And what does that mean? And there's just like tension, right, in the market. But I think going back to the core of just at some point, humans interacting, you were talking about the data, sharing going faster. And I would say, and also richer and deeper and all of the things that come with it, which I'm sure you probably meant. But I think for our audience, I want to make sure that's like, just that rounded human experience is so key and critical because you understand perspective. And going off that Stephen Covey's story and your anecdote about bridges, right? And it's not always requiring you to go all the way over to somebody's side and change your perspective, right? It's also about bringing them over and meeting in the middle and saying, let's discuss and see where we go. And let's have an in this day and age, let's have an intellectual conversation, recognizing that we all bring something different to that bridge or that conversation. So, as you're kind of going through your day and thinking about how you've mentored people and had conversations and just those pickup conversations and trying to get your story, your point across through a story, How do you kind of work that into the conversation, I guess I would say.
In part, it's about asking questions,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
about and that goes back to that story listening piece,
Mhm.
right? It's about really understanding what is it that somebody's trying to get out of this interaction, right? And so you start out with the small talk, right? This is the purpose of small talk. How do we connect with each other,
Mhm.
right? What is
Right.
that human connection? And that's why people do it, right? Watch yourself at the next kind of open party you go to, right? A bunch of people that you don't know. And watch and see what are the questions that you are asking or they are asking, or how are you getting around to sharing information and some connection. You're from X. Or, geez, it's hot outside. Sorry, it's 120 degrees here in New York, 115 here in Phoenix. It's crazy. Um, but but those connection points are the ones that you walk down, right? To create that human connection, right? And it's easy to work from there. And it could be one-on-one. One of the things that I do with an audience, right, when there's a large group of people, this is harder to do if if you're being translated, right? But it's easy to do if you're speaking in the language that your audience understands, right? Is I'll ask a question. How many people here, X, right? When was how many of you actually realized you were different in grade school?
Ah. Yeah.
And every single person has an answer to that. Every human being has an answer to that. And then that connects with. And so it creates that connection. And that's the path that you walk down. And I'm not saying when you cross that bridge, if you will, that you're changing your own mind. Your purpose is, what is the connection that you're trying to make with another human being?
Yeah.
And when you're in person, it's easier to make those connections, right? It's, something as silly as height or glasses or the button on your backpack or right? There's thousands of different things that you see and notice and experience when you're with somebody else. So one of the things actually in the last couple of companies that I worked with, as we were dealing with this issue of return to the office or not return to the office, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I was doing was the manager math around what would it take if we were able to bring teams together every 6 weeks or so, because that's when trust starts to break down, is after about 6 weeks.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Yeah.
so what would it cost us as a business to enable teams to bring together? And I think, in the back of my head, I think the manager math worked out to about $20,000 per employee per year if it were just domestic. So
Right.
that's plane flights. And is it worth hiring the best people on the planet where they live and enabling them to work and live from home if, as part of that cost, we actually added that $20,000 per employee just to add to travel dollars, right? So that was one of the things that I was looking at implementing so that we could mitigate against this everybody has to return to work every day. Because even
Mhm.
if at least in tech, right? I'll say this just from the tech perspective because that's my background. Even if we had 100% return to work, everybody in the office, you're still dealing with 15% absenteeism for whatever reason, somebody's sick,
Mhm.
doctor, whatever, right? And you're still dealing with the fact that you're not actually just working with the team that you're working with.
Right. Right.
You're not actually just working with your manager,
Right.
right? You're working always with a bunch of other people who may or may not be in the same location. So you got to figure out how to deal with this, right? Um, so sorry, long-winded answer, right? But
Well,
I
we
think,
got a lot of
think
good information. I have to say, I love looking at return to office or whatever through an engineer's perspective and a leader's perspective too, right? Because that's not always, kind of what is the cost benefit analysis? It's like how, what is it going to take for the organization to bring it? What does it matter when you're in? Esco and I have talked about when you're in the office, be thoughtful about that time, right? It's not just for the sake of being in a literal building, but it's using that opportunity to your benefit, by the way,
Yeah.
of making connections you might not otherwise by literally getting up every couple hours to make sure you get a new cup of coffee or something to put yourself in sort of the line of sight of different.
Or maybe we just totally change the way offices look,
Right.
right? So that an individual workspace is what you have at home,
Uh-huh.
but in the office, it's a series of conference rooms,
Uh-huh.
right? So that a team can actually work together, take over a conference room for a day, a week, right? Everybody's going to be there. Nobody's got, parent teacher conferences and all of this, in the evening. You're just going to throw everybody in the room. I used to do this. Sorry. We used to call this, one of the teams that I worked with a while back. What did we call it? It was a work from work week.
Mm.
It was a work from work week because we had half the team in Colorado and half the team in California, right?
Right.
We would just say, okay, and it was probably every 8 weeks by the time we were done.
Mhm.
But we were finding and fixing bugs in the
Yeah.
code. So everybody was in the same room, right? And I would just slide pizza under the door. Oh, they're probably laughing their asses off. But
Probably. But I have to feel like there was some energy in that room that I mean,
oh, you bet.
obviously there is
Oh, yeah.
energy, and I'm not gonna deny it, right? In energy, a different energy in that room.
It's funny you bring that up as a cost analysis, and $5,000 actually per employee per quarter sounds spot on, knowing what T&E costs are, right? But we had the opportunity during, the virtual training stuff that my company was doing, where literally I would sit in this cave for 4 hours per day and watch some type of virtual simulcast that had live people answering questions, but a recorded message. And I was supposed to do that for 3 days straight. 4 hours every day, 3 days straight. So the I went to one of my peers that I've known for a while and I said, "What if out of our own pockets, we got together at an Airbnb and all 12, 15 of us, chipped in, everyone would take turn getting the meals and whatever, and we all watch it together. That way we get the camaraderie,
Uh-huh.
we get the learning discussion because, okay, hey, he said that. What's your take on that? Or whatever the case
Me,
may be.
right.
Yeah. And so we get all that discussion. Of course, there's some cutting up that happens in between here and there, but we were so willing, and we did actually out of our own pockets, fly to the same place, pay for the
Yeah.
Airbnb. Everyone took turns. I mean, we literally did that. And the cost was what you said it was,
Uh-huh.
but it was out of our own pockets. We now, given my peers all been in the industry 15, 20 years, and so we all got the value. We knew what the value was going to be. So it was well worth the money. But it's funny how you look at companies today and they struggle with paying for that, knowing that you're going to get productivity when you get them all in the same room. You're going to get great things to happen.
Yeah. We're close to time, and I wanna make sure that Bev gets in a couple things about finding joy in different spaces, generational. We haven't talked at all about
That's
this.
that's the question I opened with was the
Yeah. Well, you asked
Yeah,
generational
about
thing.
the plan. You asked about the plan.
Yep.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and some people have a very strong plan for their life, right?
Mm.
And what Esco didn't mention is I'm retired. I love being retired. I am having such a blast, not just motorcycling around the world. We're getting ready to go to South Africa for 3 weeks to ride a motorcycle around South Africa, but also scuba diving. So if you want some amazing underwater critters, right, figure out a way to follow me. What I've realized is as humans, we're actually living a lot longer in a more healthy way, right? And when I grew up, right, that there's it seems to me that there's actually kind of three stages of life now. There's that first stage where you're in school, you're learning. No matter how long you're really in school, you're actually learning, right? You're trying to figure out what the heck this is all about, right? And then there's that second stage, which you all are in, which is that growth, putting all of that work that you did in the first stage to action, right? And going through the how do I feed my family? What are my real values and how am I living my values, right? And how do I figure out how to live my values? And I am lucky enough now live in a time when for the third stage of life, it's actually going to be as long as those first two, right?
That's aw that is
In a
so
healthy
awesome.
way. If I do the right things, right? If I take care of myself, do the right things. And so a lot of what I'm doing now, figuring out how to give back and where to give. So this is one of my give back things in my mind, right? I put together, just a shit ton of experience. Other people might be able to take advantage of it and not go through some of the grind that
Yeah.
I did, because you get to learn from me. But also, you know, fundamentally, there are only three things that you have to give: time, treasure, or talent,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's it, right? And you have to be able to live with how you're giving them, how you're sharing, right? And I figure as long as I'm continuing to learn, which talking with you guys helps me with, right?
Yeah. We love it.
Um, I get the opportunity to also teach, and to share. And no, I don't have a plan for it. I didn't have a plan through. I mean, the plan is set for you when you go through school, right?
Right.
Get, real clear demarcations, first grade, second grade, high school to college, whatever. Those are real clear. The rubric is set, right? Then you get out into the big wide world, and students, this is the biggest problem that they have. Nobody tells them how to get to the next grade.
That's
Nope,
right.
doesn't happen.
We hear that all the time.
How to get to the next grade.
Just tell.
That's a great statement right there.
So true.
Okay,
That's a
I
double click if I
graduated.
ever heard one.
How do
Right?
I get to the next grade?
Yeah.
Nobody tells. It's the biggest problem. It's the biggest challenge that they have,
Yeah.
right? And I used to tell, as a manager, as a manager of interns or people just coming directly out of school, right, brand new to the working world. I said, this is going to be, the thing that you have to figure out,
Yeah.
because you define what the next grade is for yourself, and you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And you can have a really structured plan. And by the way, right, what is it? Man plans and God laughs.
Oh, yes.
It's a little, it's a sexist statement, but it's true, right?
Yeah. And doesn't have summer
Yeah.
vacation.
Right. Um, so I didn't plan those 45 years of working, really. My brother has a plan. He has a 5-year plan. I think he's absolutely nuts. I could not do that, right? But I didn't, right? So my wife says to me, I'm retiring, right? And my wife says to me, so what are you going to do with your plan? With your plan? I'm like, I don't have one. She's like, how can you not have a plan? I don't, I don't have a plan, right? I get to set my own schedule. I'm having a blast. She said, how can you not have a plan? I said, well, I didn't have a plan for the first 45 years. Why do I have a plan now?
I did for my Instagram reels, there's like one spouse that always has the plan. The other one's like, I don't know. That's the only way it's going to work. You can't have two plans.
But Bev, you reminded me that you made a statement about this third act of your life, but you're still making sure that you guys go and do things where you can still learn and still
Oh, yeah.
experience. And that is a constant. So if you think about it, you know, you never really stopped learning.
Mm-mm.
Act
No.
1,
Yeah.
No.
Act 2, you get to learn with whatever life dealt you. Congratulations on all that, the wins and the grinds, but now you're also learning. And that's what I loved about learning about your adventures, was that you were going to places because of something you wanted to learn about and taking time to actually do that. And I'm looking forward to following you and seeing all the wonderful adventures that you and your wife tackle. But I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you the tough one. Here we go. The show's called The Wins and the Grind.
Yeah.
The middle act 2, the win and the grind.
I think the win for me was just the sheer scale of the numbers of people that I've met who were just amazing individuals, right? I
Mhm.
had the honor of living and working all over the world. Um, People are mind blowing on a regular basis, right?
Oh, that's true.
And
Yeah.
I had just the most amazing opportunity to live and work with amazing people, right? And to do things and to follow them, right? In doing things that that nobody else had ever done before, right? The grind, I think, comes with the choices that I made and the spaces where I found that my values and the organization's values were never going to align.
Mm.
And over again in my career, when I found myself in that situation, it was gut wrenching, right? But I will say that, when I found myself in a situation, in a relationship, in a organization, in a challenge, and I realized that the values were misaligned, I could do something about it.
Uh-huh.
But it was that space of, I'm not happy, and why? That space in there before you figure out that there's a values mismatch, right? That is really the problem, right? The grind. That's
Uh-huh.
the hard, because as long as your values are aligned, right? As long as you can be who you are, as long as you can actually bring your whole self to the situation, um, there's hope, right? There's positivity, there's opportunity, right? But if your values are misaligned, right? If the organization is looking at one approach or one way of being, and you're like, no, that shit doesn't work for me,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
That's just that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. So
And life doesn't need to be harder than it is.
right, right, right.
You're right. It's so foundational.
Bev, I want to say thank you for spending time with
Yeah.
us today, giving us your time. And even ahead of that, thank you for being approachable. Thank you for
Mhm.
being somebody that I got a chance to spend some time with and learn from and what have you. Your last name was VP when I met you, and you were as approachable as anyone else, any of my other peers at the time. And thank you for that. Respectfully, I learned a lot from you, and I enjoyed that time. So again, thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn from you today. And audience, I'd love for you to stay tuned. You met the traveling storyteller. In our next couple of episodes, we're going to meet the strategic storyteller, the catalyst storyteller, and the tactical storyteller. Again, Bev, thank
Mhm.
you for your time. Bev Crair, Lisa Tilt. Bye.